Hello, Rachel.
How are you?
I am doing very, very good because I am back on the worm. How about yourself?
I'm feeling less confident in this particular worm we're riding.
What's wrong with this worm? It can see things. It has the ability to burn you from inside out. Isn't that cool?
I'm not debating that. I just don't know how this is all gonna turn out. Like, are we gonna safely dismount? Is it gonna drag us through a dune?
Is it going to eat us? Is it going to buck us off? We don't know.
Is it
It's
gonna
all
eat us and spit us out?
And give us cool eyes?
We don't know.
Cool vision? We'll find out. Rachel, we have a few more episodes of this given series to find out how it all goes for us riding this worm.
We do.
And we are back here to talk about an episode of a new series that's coming out, Dune Prophecy.
As is the pattern so far with Yum podcast, we are doing a episode by episode breakdown of a sci-fi show. This time we are doing Dune Prophecy, and we're doing it episode by episode as it comes out.
That's right, and we are up to the second episode called Two Wolves, and here is what the IMDb summary has to say about this particular one. After receiving word about events on Salusa Secundus, Valia brings Theodosia to the Imperial House to manage the situation. Meanwhile, Desmond makes a confession to the Emperor. Tallulah reluctantly enlists Lila for a vital mission, and distrust swirls around Kieran Atreides, the Swordmaster. Did you know that there was mistrust swirling around him? Distrust. Did you know there was distrust and mistrust?
No, it was just like, and he's part of the rebellion.
And at the
nobody else knows that.
At the end of the episode, it's brought up as a thing, and the Mother Superior is like, "Oh, an Atreides? Okay. Well, we'll manage that later." Here we are talking about Dune Prophecy. If people have not seen this episode for themselves, be warned, we're going to get into the full details of it now and give you our impressions and thoughts on it. And I'll just get right in. I thought this episode was a step down from the premiere. There was a lot more things that I do not care for in modern TV storytelling. There's much more of a Game of Thrones influence present in this series than I care for. Honestly, there's also just an imbalance between the two places we're focusing in on. The sisterhood is far less interesting. They're far less interesting. The characters are very flat there and not at all compelling to me. The Imperium side of things has more to grasp onto, and I think has a greater range of characters, as well as the performers have the ability to bring something out of the material there. And I just have a favor towards shenanigans inside of a palace, but even that I found to be a little lackluster in this episode, because as soon as I was getting into an element of that, we had to go to somewhere else, and there was just a bit too much on the plate in this episode for me to enjoy all of the contents of it. There's things in the production of it that I'm just not a fan of. The music is a persistent thorn in my side with this series, as well as just some of the choices they make to represent
do you want to give
things.
Your yum music moment?
Well, we do have to flag up that Yum, the name of the podcast, was from an absurd moment in the series Star Trek Discovery, where a character said a line that was completely out of context in the scene. There was no way to say yum yum in that moment and make it make sense, and yet there it was. And that's what we're doing with the music of this series. In each episode, we'll flag up a moment where we think the music itself was yum yum. And for me, it was when Desmond Hart was arrested and they were walking him to the floater cell thing, and there was the typical bwom sound, but they tripled it. They had it go bwom, 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 and it was hilarious to me. I laughed. It made me think of the Brazilian World Cup with the vuvuzelas. Remember that era of life?
I do.
I was guffawing because this series is very po-faced, but the music is so out of character for what we get here that it annoys me and also entertains me, but not in the way that it's supposed to. So, Rachel, I've done a lot of talking. How about you give us the lay of the land about how you feel about Two Wolves and your yum yum music moments?
I didn't care for this episode. And it's kind of hard to explain exactly why it doesn't work. But there's a moment that I feel really illustrates where, like, I'm like, oh, that's what's going on here. And there was a specific moment, which I can share now or later. Like, a lot of it's very obvious in what it's doing, not necessarily where it's heading, but what it's doing. And that the characters are just there for plot. Like, none of them feel like people to me. They feel like they're roles within the plot and within the world, but not people.
And there's not even the joy of what we get from the Frank Herbert books or even the other Dune adaptations, in which the lack of them feeling like a people can at least be, you can at least be okay with it because they're representations of something else, like thematically or some kind of allegorical thing. Like the Harkonnens, for instance, aren't deep characters, but they represent things. They are something more that you can chew on and think about. But with this show, there's not enough people with that even.
Like, the princess draws the analogy of, like, they're all chess pieces.
And funnily enough, she's probably the character in the show to me that feels the most like a person, and the one that I actually am invested in.
Like, it feels like the characters are all pieces that the writer is moving around and positioning to do these things and to open up this thing and show this thing. The moment where I was like, oh, I'm bored, because I realized that I wouldn't be paying attention or caring about this kind of stuff if I was interested or invested. And it's when Lila is talking with one of the sisters on the other sister's bed about, like, should she sacrifice herself? And there's another sister that's listening into this conversation.
Sister Jen is the one listening in.
Down the hall. And she's just holding a blanket.
And she's listening.
Why is she holding a blanket? Well, it's just to give her business so that she has something to do while she stands there.
It's a visual cue to give the audience leeway for her to be eavesdropping. Because this isn't the days of Babylon 5 where characters would literally just be standing around corners to hear things. This is one where you have to give her some business. So she's, because it's a serious show, so it's bedtime. You can't wag your finger at this, Rachel, because they gave the actress a little blankie to communicate. She was on her way to bedtime and she heard this conversation had stopped. And you can't be like, oh, well, this is...
they don't leave the blankets on the beds.
Well, she might have brought it back from it being washed.
Maybe they're not allowed to have, like, specific bunks, but they're allowed to have specific blankets.
They have to make their bed every night. The Reverend Mothers come in and teach them how to do, like, hospital corners or whatever it is. Army blanket styles, yeah. What you're bringing up is spot on, too, because what you're really got your finger on the pulse with is that you're seeing the artifice of it. The scene is, and you expand this out to a lot of the episode, it's very much paint by numbers and you're not engaging within the way that they want you to. You're supposed to be leaning in and really absorbing the headiness of Lila's concerns and seeing that Sister Jen, who is very much a different character in the sisterhood, is concerned about things. You're supposed to be feeling the conflicting senses of emotions here, but what you're seeing is an actor be told, hold this blanket
and look in that direction.
Because it will help contextualize why your character is overhearing this in the first place, other than because the script said so. And totally get that. But what's your Yum Yum music moment, Rachel?
Also Desmond related. And definitely something that I pre-planned to say, and I remembered to think about the music. It's at the end of the episode, when she's the Reverend Mother Superior, is there trying to find the Emperor, and Desmond Hart walks in, and the music when that happens is just
It's a lot, isn't it? You know what's also a lot? Title sequences these days. We get one. I didn't expect... It's so silly of me. I should have known. The premiere did not have a title sequence. So it wasn't in my mind. I didn't even think, oh, this doesn't have a title sequence. So the second episode comes around and there is a title sequence, and it is very much of this run of TV shows where they... I don't know if it's the same effects house group, but there's that group that makes these title sequences to all of these shows, these very lavish, gaudy, over-the-top, very long, animated title sequences with imagery that's very clever and oh so smart and relates to the show in some nebulous way.
You don't even get to properly register what one thing is before it moves on to the next.
It's very quick. The series of images they show you is quick enough where you feel like you have to watch it again, which maybe is a compliment, I don't know, but it lacks so much character. And that's the damning thing about it.
It doesn't feel like it gives me an indication of what the show is like.
It's generic. It's just another one of these. And that's such a detriment because as much negativity as we're bringing up top here, there's so much to admire about the series. There's so much to praise and enjoy, and it definitely has a character. The show itself, the look of the show, the feel of the show, yes, even the music, which I think goes against it. It has an identity. This has something to it. It struggles to maintain its identity because it's buried underneath the trappings of what HBO or the writers think needs to be water cooler discussion television. This is just buried underneath having to evoke the films, as well as having to just be another one of these dramas, whether it's you directly go for like the obvious Game of Thrones comparison or even your Star Warsian comparisons here and there. And yes, I know for sure that George Lucas clearly read the Frank Herbert books and maybe did some stuff with Star Wars. But I'm just saying, in terms of this television series, the opening credits do a massive disservice. Why are they there? Why do we need opening credits for this show? I think a title card is all you need, and it would cut 4 minutes out of the episode. These episodes are long already, and then you have the title sequences. Anything else you want to say about the title sequence?
No, I really don't, because there isn't much of substance in the title sequence. There are a bunch of symbols that's just like, oh, I know that because I know the movies.
Worms,
Okay.
eyes are blue, spice.
Ooh. Like, it doesn't tell us anything about the specific sort of themes, attitude, atmosphere of this representation of the world of Dune.
No, it just is riding off the coattails of other shows. It's very Game of Thrones, where we are seeing these different locations of these different factions.
Yeah, representations of them. Like, we get the bull from the Atreides mythology.
Oh, yes, and we get Worm, we get the blue eyes stuff. Oh, here's the palace, here's the sisterhood, and so on. Let's just get this out of the way. We've already said it, but Game of Thrones hangs over this show for us both. And not just for us. Some of the comments we've gotten back from our previous episode discussion feels the same. We have a joke on our Discord, which people can be a part of if they join our Patreon, as well as get these episodes early. But one of our patrons gave this the name Game of Worms because it definitely has those sensibilities in there. The cinematography, some of the costuming, the way that they implement the palace intrigue and the sex.
Sets feel redesigned. But yeah, let's talk about the sex.
Yeah, let's talk about the sex, the sets, all of that stuff. It's easy to say, oh, it feels very Game of Thrones because, it's palace intrigue and it's made by HBO and there's British actors in it. But what about this series has that feel for you, especially because you are someone who didn't consume as much Game of Thrones as most people, including myself?
Yeah, because it didn't hold my interest. I wasn't interested, and then I felt like I was missing out because I wasn't participating in the cultural moment.
You must have felt like a fool when that finale came and you weren't watching it. You must have had real egg on your face when you missed out on that epic conclusion to that series.
No, I was very happy with how much time I spent with Game of Thrones and that I quit when I did. And I echo what you say and what people in the Discord are saying. It does feel very reminiscent of Game of Thrones, and I think a lot of that comes through in terms of the visual storytelling. Like, I feel like the sets themselves feel like they're reused Game of Thrones sets, and the way that things are shot, like in terms of positioning of cameras and types of shots, it feels very much the same. And then you have a lot of existing similarities between the two. And because at the moment prophecy for me doesn't have a strong enough voice on its own, it's just reminding me of other things that I've seen.
And so when those familiar things pop up, it feels expected and required. My biggest thing about it is the sex, for instance, or the backstabbing scenes, or the dramatic reveal scenes feel very much out of obligation and requirement rather than naturally in there. The sex, just because this show had surprise sex scene and it's very, he is boobies and he is male buttocks thrusting, doesn't make it Game of Thrones. Many shows have this, and the books themselves are very sexual.
HBO's known for that.
And it gets critiqued for that as well, of like, oh, to be an adult show, you have to be violent and sexual all of the time and swear all of the time. That's something like not just Game of Thrones, but like HBO as a brand, as an entity, gets ridiculed for as well because it's a little bit too try-hard. And that's the thing. It feels try-hard in this show because these things do exist in the books. Sex, for instance, is a huge component of the books, especially for the Bene Gesserit and the offshoots of them later on, and the sexual manipulation and how it's used as a very obvious form of manipulation and power play, and it's transactional. And if I have to give some praise, I did like how the sex itself in this episode was framed as that. It was overtly transactional. She is using this dumb guy to leverage information from him. So to counter some of the stuff we're saying, I think it lines up in that way. I think it is kind of fun, but it just came in a moment where it was like the bell rang of like, it's booby time. Like, hey guys, we got to show that this is an adult series. Like, this is a mature show. Like, this is gritty.
But they laid the groundwork for that while they were giving each other fuck me eyes over a boy's corpse.
That's a part of the bigger problem too, is there's no subtleties. And yet it feels like they're playing like it's subtle. Everyone knows, from us, the viewer, to the characters, that Desmond Hart, for instance, is obviously a shifty, manipulative guy, but it also keeps playing it like, what a subtle master manipulator. No, he isn't.
No.
And same with like those two, where they're clearly giving me the fuck me eyes, and she's clearly betraying him. It's like, how does he not know? Is he that stupid?
When she's just like, oh, my father doesn't confide in me. And it's just like, no, but she clearly would want to please her father.
And that's what I think was a major downside from the previous episode. A lot of these things are just cranked up too high. Like the Emperor's level of pathetic is comedic in this episode. Like the way Mark Strong plays it was like laugh out loud funny. But
you're still in charge.
But I don't think it's supposed to be that laugh out loud funny. There's this moment when Desmond Hart does something and the Emperor gives like a double take. Whoa! And Mark Strong's a fantastic actor, but I'm looking at that going, hey, director, maybe tell him to pull it back a little bit because he's so nakedly pathetic of a character. Like, how does anyone respect him or even listen to him other than the title? And that's where things are a little bit more murky in this episode, where a lot of it is that. A lot of it is just they crank it up too much, where my suspension of disbelief starts to break down.
Yeah, well, for me, I reach a similar point, but it never got me interested enough to say that I was bought in and my belief was suspended, because I was always very aware that I was watching a show that was constructed. Thus, I had the issue with the business of her holding the blanket. I had several moments where I commented on those kinds of things when we were watching the episode. Like, one where it just felt lazy was all of the acolytes sitting around the table, and it looked like it was filmed on the same day as the same scene from last episode, and it follows the same beats pretty much of they're all sitting around the table discussing and gossiping about what's going on, and how they might be impacted and what's going to happen. And then somebody says something poignant or reflective, stands up and walks away.
And they did that in the last episode too. The exact same thing. It's rinse, repeat. But those characters aren't interesting enough for you to be absorbed in, as you say.
Yeah, and it's also like, really, you're doing the exact same scene 2 episodes in a row, and they are your only 2 episodes? Like, if you're relying on that same sort of cheap screenwriting tricks already,
Yeah.
what are you going to have to offer in 3 episodes' time?
We're supposed to find those moments a lot more thought-provoking than we actually do. And I loved the pitch for this episode, by the way. I just want to get into some of the more positive aspects of this. I love the central pitch from following up where the last episode is. The 2 strands, the Sisterhood and the Imperium, are going to converge via these murder investigations. Desmond Hart has managed to kill 2 people in separate locations in the same way. We, the audience, have this information. We, the audience, know somehow he's done this. We've seen him do it. We know he has some kind of mystical powers. What they are, don't know. But what is important is we do know that he's the perpetrator. This episode is about seeing these 2 sides figure out who the perpetrator is and at what speed and which ones learn what and how does that affect the other investigation. I think that's a fantastic pitch for an episode. I think the momentum of which it built was quite well done, and I like the quandaries it brought up when Desmond Hart just openly admits to it with no sense of remorse, and the Emperor decides if he's okay with that or not. And if he is, what does that mean? Because he has all of these other people breathing down his neck. The Duke obviously has power and influence of his own. He has the ships. He hasn't given them away yet. So you can't piss him off. It's this war of etiquette. It's this war of convenient relationships, as well as just morals. Like, you know, if the princess found out about this, she would be outraged because she actually feels remorse for this little boy dying, while the emperor's wife, she's thinking about this as like, oh, this is an advantage. Like, all of that stuff was juicy to me. I thought that was very well done. And even the sisterhood side, where they're looking at this from the scientific point of view, they're trying to figure out, like, how could this be done? And while we get to the end of the episode, it seems like it's much more of a magic thing that has gone on, and that for these witches, for these sisters who seemingly have their own forms of magic abilities, but they want to base this in more of a forensic capability and lens, it perturbs the Mother Superior that Desmond Hart is this abomination, unknown entity that can do such things. Like, the thing that tripped us up when we watched it that I'm a little bit more favorable to now is Desmond Hart says, I did it. But that's not good enough because neither party knows how he did both of them at the same time from the distance.
He admits to killing the boy. I don't think he specifically says that he killed Kasha too.
He says, like, she had to be taken care of. She was corrupt.
Oh, yeah, like, yeah.
He basically says, yeah, I had to murder her because she was corrupt.
It's the Emperor that goes, how could he have killed Kasha from... Yeah.
All of this distance. Now, we were caught up on that when we were watching it, but I think it's more about, like, they need that detail known to proceed forward, because what do? You arrest him, and then what? He could just kill someone from across the galaxy anyway if you lock him up in jail. Like, he's an unknown variable. Now, what did you feel about this stuff here? Because that's kind of like the spine of the episode is them kind of having to really grapple with and wrestle with the information of the perpetrator. Yeah. And what to do from there.
And it is an interesting move that he just admits it, and then they're just dealing with him sort of the Imperium is deciding whether he is a threat or a weapon for them.
He's an ally. He's offering his services to us. How could we
Yes.
lock up a friend?
That's definitely the Empress's opinion, and she sways the Emperor. But it all just felt very much, we've got to get these pieces in position, because it was never going to be resolved by Mother Superior going there, because there wouldn't be a show otherwise. Like, you've got to set up Desmond Hart having this influence and being successful in the court.
And it's a part of his plan to lure her there.
Yes.
To fuck over the sisterhood because they're the true enemy.
Yeah, he wants to see the face of his enemy. And this, like, he knows what he's doing, and she doesn't know what she's up against yet. And we get a more solid example of that when she tries to get him to slit his own throat at the end of the episode, and he is immune to the voice.
And she's never encountered that before. And he makes it oh so clear that he knows her weakness. That it's not that people won't listen, it's that they just won't care what you have to say. And that shuts her up real good. Desmond Hart is definitely the standout of this series.
He feels like the most unique thing that the show has to offer at the moment.
Why? And how so?
I guess because we are unsure of where he sits within the overall morality of this world. Like, we can go, killing a child is bad, that makes this man bad. But does it make him worse, better, or on par with somebody that we know orchestrated and forced a suicide so that she could gain control over a cult?
That's the brilliant thing about Desmond is he makes you question the sides that you want to be on, because on the surface he's a good person, right? Because he knows the sisterhood is evil and corrupt and undermining everyone and trying to pull the strings.
But that doesn't make him immune from being evil himself.
But who cares is the thing that he would spit out, because it's like he is being honest. He's telling people, or seemingly honest enough to an extent. He says, I'm here to do this. These people are working against you. This is what's happening here. But he doesn't give all of the information. Like, he knows it's the sisterhood, but he hasn't really shared that with the Emperor. He's just shared that you've had people undermining you.
Yes.
And I can help you with that. And the Emperor wanted that kid dead, and the guy killed him, and then is shocked that that happened, and then is playing coy. And it's like, Desmond Hart's like, you're playing coy.
As much truth as he wants, depending on the person that he's talking to. And he's very successfully playing all of these people.
But he's so clearly playing them. That's the thing that's so fascinating. He's not even, he's not playing the game like they are playing the game, where the Mother Superior walks in halfway through the, chamber meeting, and she does the whole, oh, hello, here, it's me, Mother Superior. Oh, Mother Superior, it's so wonderful to see you. Oh, I heard one of mine. So, oh, could we use you as a truth sayer? Well, of course. Like, they're all playing these games of politics, but Desmond Hart is being an obvious freak. He's clearly shifty and wormy and creepy and bizarre, but he's being open and honest about it to an extent that makes him weirdly refreshing and a change of pace. This is what I want to know your feelings on this, since you've only seen the movies, the David Lynch ones and the Denis Villeneuve movies, and they're drastically different. But I think Desmond Hart is a standout because he's weird. Like, he's a weird performance and a weird character, and Dune needs freaks.
You
and this
love
series,
your little freaks.
But don't you...
Yes, freaks belong in this world.
And there's none of them except for him in this show. They're all just straight-laced people. Even the sisters who are creepy and weird, they're not like Lady Jessica in the second Dune movie where she's like a fucking weird, bizarre freak, or like Charlotte Rampling in the first one was like, oh, she's clearly like creepy and weird. They're all so normal to me. Like, why is this a Dune show? There's not enough freaky shit. And Desmond Hart's the freaky shit. Like, he's a freak, and so he's important to us as a viewer because like, oh, finally, someone who's different. Here's my concern about Desmond Hart. Is he interesting because he is a mystery box? Is there actually any substance to him as a character? Or is he only interesting because he brings out speculation and in so doing makes us engage with him as a character? But is he anything?
He does feel like he is a genuine threat to the sisterhood. Like, obviously not gonna take them down, but he might just be able to set them back quite some time.
I bring it up because I always worry, especially now with mystery box or mystery type things, because the setup phase is where it's all engaging you. It's, oh, there's so much potential. What could it be? What is he? Is he a goaler? Is he a face dancer? Is he this? Is he this? What's his deal? Could he be
Did he really
this?
get eaten by a worm?
And those can be exciting to an extent, but you need something more. And what I do think they have is his existence and presence is a challenge for us, the viewer, and for them, the characters. He is this temptation for the Emperor and the Imperium to do the most heinous shit because they need to be on top. And the Sisterhood are threatened by this because we're supposed to be the ones that pull the strings, not just some random guy. And like, where does it end? I think that's what makes him a lot more than just a question mark. Like, he sustains himself on speculation, but he exists to bring out all of these tumultuous sides of the characters, like the Empress. The Empress, she was very reasonable and level-headed and nice last episode, but now she sees an opportunity to strike.
Didn't think that fondly of her.
Well, when she was talking to her daughter, and even in the last episode when she was talking to the Emperor and trying to be like, hey,
I saw her as being annoyed that she's lost the power that she used to have, and she's lost that power to the sisterhood and basically to Kasha, and now sees an opportunity to reclaim that.
Oh, I agree with you. I just found her more overtly sympathetic last episode, and in this episode, that's what I'm saying. Desmond Hart is here, and she's going to grab this opportunity and fucking go for it and be this deplorable person. Like, she's a villain in this show, the Emperor's wife. Like, she's despicable in this episode. Like, what's up? We saw a child get brutally murdered. This guy did it. Awesome. Love that. Let's use him. Let's just keep going and see how it all
on old fears.
And 2 episodes in, shifts of power in the court already. The Duke, played by the lovable Australian actor Brendan Cowell, is rightfully pissed off. And you know what I really appreciated about his performance? He was rightfully angry. in the last episode, he was a cartoony, over-the-top, snobbish, sniveling conniver. And in this one, I actually kept writing in my notes, he's right. He's right. He's completely correct. And it's down to not just the writing, but the performance. Like, he's no longer just the obvious sniveling, I'm grabbing at power in any way I can. Like, now is an upset dad, like, who's lost his child, and he knows that the system is going to fuck him over on this. And I actually kind of felt bad for the Duke. Like, he's one of my favorite characters in the show because each moment we spend with him, you know what he's about.
And they do point out how he is dangerous if he lets himself be driven and led by his grief. Which is weird because we both commented on him being a viable threat before he was pissed that they killed his son.
Well, and it's also funny that the sisterhood are the ones saying this about him. Like, oh, you need to control him. You need to rein him in because his emotions are driving him away from our control, because they're all about control. They're all about manipulation and about making people fall into line. Hence, they have the power in the court, and hence it's so satisfying that Desmond Hart, who cannot be influenced by them, literally, is the one that's now making their reign on the Imperium start to weaken and lessen. And the classic, you've been revoked. You might as well have been sitting behind the police captain's desk and grabbed her badge off of her. I thought it was very funny. Your power's been revoked. It made me laugh. I chuckled a lot. I guess they're done with the Ricchisi family or whatever they were called. I liked them. I wanted more of them. Like, I like the sexy daughter. I like the grieving. I like the hysterical mother. I liked the Duke, who was always just like mustache twirling. They were characters. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't as freaky as I need them to be, but they were vibrant little characters. And I'm going to miss them not being in the show.
Yeah, they definitely feel like, and we're moving on from them.
How do you feel about the world building? They start to go beyond the Sisterhood and the Imperium. They're really building up the dissatisfaction with how society is run.
Yeah, we get a rebellion. Isn't that fun, Brian? We really understand and feel the weight of the have-nots complaining, including an Atreides.
Well, he's the inside man. And Atreides are noble. So he's too noble for his own good. He's the swords master. So he's nice and close to the family, but he can also have the ability to have side stuff going on. This being a prequel, we know that nothing's going to really come about because nothing changes in this way.
It will not but they're not even really talking about destroying the system.
Well,
they're like, that's sort of like what they would love to happen, but they're like, we need to attack the Emperor to inspire others so that then we can dismantle everything. But they have no plan for what they would replace it with.
They want to destroy the system, but they haven't thought too much beyond that because, look,
they're like, this is unfair, this should stop.
And they don't understand what we learn in the other conversation about if the Duke took over, which is it's all good to destroy the palace and to kill the Emperor, but the real power is Arrakis. All the families, the Sisterhood, the Navigators Guild, all of the players know that that's where the seat of power comes from, not the palace, not the Emperor, who's ever in charge of that. So even if this rebellion did something like did an assassination or kidnapping as the princess goes over, it doesn't mean anything because it won't change. The system doesn't change because Arrakis is where the system is actually at.
Yes, and
Desmond Hart is
you
from.
cannot change that Arrakis is the seat of power. Because it's a whole fucking planet. And the world needs spice. So you can only really change who's in control of it.
And there's the beauty of the fact that the rebellion, we learn, is actually something that has been built up and conjured from by the sisterhood. It's a controlled rebellion.
Yeah, the bartender is a reverend mother.
And she has the blue eyes. And that was a nice little thing that they put in, because that's the sisterhood to me. That type of stuff where you think, oh, here's this great, noble, heroic thing going on that's going to change status quo, and our heroes are heroes. No, they're just a part of it without even being aware. They're just a part of a grand scheme and plan.
To think that they weren't. Like, it was a very quick turnaround from here's the rebellion to they're actually part of the sisterhood's plans.
It is too quick. 6 episodes is all we're going to get. And the reveal of the rebellion being a thing to then it being made by the sisterhood and is going to be collapsed by the sisterhood so that they can then further control the emperor doesn't really help. But here's the thing that sucks about it. We don't know anything about this Atreides. We don't know him as a character. I couldn't tell you anything about him other than he fucks the princess and loves her. But he can't be with her because of, the way the things work. But I don't know anything about him. Who is he? What does he... And this is their way, you could argue, of showing us what he's about. Like, he's so noble and true of heart that he thinks that we should abolish the way things are. And he will join a rebellion group and be willing to lie. Like, he's two-faced. Like, here he is with the princess sword fighting, but also, like, he's going to potentially get her family overthrown and killed. And she tells the story about, like, getting kidnapped this one time and, like, all of the stuff that happened from that and what was learned. And here's this Atreides going to fall down the same path anyway. And what do you do about that? But, like, it's too quick. We don't know him. He doesn't have the benefit of having what we talk about with some of the other players in the Imperium, because we don't. Not only does he not have much definition, we just haven't spent much time with him. Like, would this be benefit?
He's been there.
Yeah, he's been there. He's a handsome guy. Truly, the only way I know who he is because he's unbelievably conventionally attractive to a degree where I'm like, he's not out. He stands out because he's so unreal in how just normally attractive he is that I don't believe he's real. Isn't that, like, bizarre? At least with like the bastard son, he's like hot, but like in that like vampiric weird way where I'm like, oh, okay, you are memorable to me because you could play a handsome little freak. Like, I'll just say this, that guy, the bastard son, he could have been that freak and Gossip Girl. You know the one I'm talking about? Like that freaky guy?
Chuck.
Sure. If this was modern Gossip, he could play that. Because he has that weird vibe, like handsome but weird. This guy's actually handsome. I didn't think Chuck was handsome. He's a freaky guy. But this guy's, you know what I'm talking about? I don't know if you agree. You're a Gossip Girl head. I'm not. I'm just saying that because he has dark eyebrows and weird cheekbones. But, can we talk about the spice?
What about it? It's talked about a lot, and I didn't really feel the weight of it, and I think its importance is undercut a little bit for me, because the only way that we're seeing it used at the moment is drugs for the princess and the prince's level of things.
And party drugs.
They just keep on snorting it, and it's just like, it's okay.
Because it is a drug. Because it is a drug, but like, they're just using it as recreational party drug.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay. So what you are showing me is spice is equivalent to cocaine.
The universe needs it for what reason?
Like, there's no acknowledgement that it's needed for navigation yet in this show.
Have any of the we haven't seen the sci-fi show like the sci-fi channel adaptations. Have any of these movies and this show ever talked about why the spice is important other than it is?
Doesn't the David Lynch?
Yeah, I guess they kind of show like...
They at least show the navigators.
They're brave enough.
Assuming that there's something about the navigators using spice.
Yeah, they kind of show it in this way of like direct like hyper travel, but in the books it's like the spice gives you like the prophetic kind of abilities to be able, like the navigators soak it in so that they can map out the future pathways of like, okay, if we travel like this, I've seen the future, oh, there's a rock here, so we have to divert like this and divert like... That's why the spice is used. It's a psychoactive agent, and it's very like, you know, malleable. There's lots of uses for it. But in this series, and I gotta say, in the Denis Villeneuve movies, the spice is just a thing. It's just a word.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have much...
They don't
context.
Unpack it or explain its multiple functions, and it's the fact that it's not just a fuel for their spaceships.
It's not a fuel at all. I don't think it's a fuel at all for their spaceships. It's just for the navigators to be like, here's how you travel. Which is the interesting part.
Yes, it's a necessity for travel, but it's not a fuel.
And I was thinking, oh, well, this show... Maybe it'll bring it up. It doesn't need to, because it's about the sisterhood. The sisterhood uses the spice, of course, for their own means, but not for necessarily... You wouldn't necessarily define the sisterhood with spice in the ways that I'm talking about. But at the same time, they're doing all this world building, and they're talking about like the spice is so important to the sustainability of the universe. They never really say why. In these movies and in this show, they never say why. And I was thinking of you. You've only ever seen the movies, and they get into all of this stuff, and... Am I correct to say, now you tell me, were you lost on some of this stuff? Or did you understand how it was presented in the episode, like the genetic memories, how spice is supposed to work, you know, these bloodlines and the stuff? Like, do you understand how they are saying it to you?
I think so. Like, I am occasionally drawing on like the movies and also what you've told me about the books. But I'm like, okay. So, well, why don't we talk about how that applies to Lila's scene?
Yeah, how about we get into Lila and all of that stuff?
Yeah, because she's there and she's being recruited to do the agony so that they can access her genetic memory and speak to the first Mother Superior and get her to explain her prophecy more.
Because Lila is a descendant, but she didn't know that. She was unaware of that because we find out a lot about how the sisterhood works. Like, you're not supposed to know who you're related to until you get to this certain echelon, and most people don't because it's very tough. Like, getting into genetic memories and the agony is something that is very selective, it seems.
Yes. But it seems like you have to do this in order to become a Reverend Mother.
But Lila's a special case because the urgency of this...
They want her memories. They need her memories.
But she's not trained and ready and prepared for it, so she could die. That's the threat. You accept this, and you could die, and there's an emotional draw because of she wants to live, but also the woman asking her feels for Lila like she treats her as her actual daughter.
I never believed that she wouldn't do it. I knew that they were just waiting near the end of the episode to do it.
That's the bummer. That's the bummer of it, isn't it? It just doesn't really get past the obvious. You know how this is going to play out, so just get to the point.
And
it
she was so naive last episode that it was just like, oh, you're not going to last in this world, honey.
No, of course you aren't. And there's just not enough for them to coast off of, because you and I have had friction on this podcast about knowing where things go and whether that gets in the way of the enjoyment or not. It much more does for you.
Yes.
Less so for me, because if the character work and the thematic stuff and just the journey
if there's
is good,
something for you to latch onto, you're fine.
Because it can even be more tragic that way too. Like, oh, Lila's going to do the agony and she'll die, clearly. But in the meantime, they're trying to really bring more weight to her existence, to what the sisterhood is, and what
it demands of you, what it takes of you, what you have to give for it.
And how far you're willing to go. Even, the Reverend Mother Tula, who's one of the top dogs, she is feeling conflicted about this because she has a personal attachment to this girl.
Oh, no. I didn't take it that way.
Because she thinks of her as a daughter herself.
Oh, no, I'm confusing. You're
thinking of Valia?
Yeah.
No, Valia doesn't give a fuck. That's why she's asking Tool. She's using, in my mind, Valia is doing this as a dick measuring competition with her own sister to be like, oh I see a weakness in you. Yeah. To make you stronger, you need to actually double down on sacrificing this girl that you think of as a daughter.
We could use this information. This is a test for you. Also for Lila. Either way, it works out for me. But it's just her using people,
using people.
Yeah.
For her own means. All of that sounds great. Like, all of that sounds like it should work. Like, Lila talking about, like, well, yeah, why? Why, though? Like, that, I'm still not sure what is holding me back, because on paper, this all sounds really great. Like, I should love this. I love, like, the conversations about how the sisterhood just use you. The sisterhood above all, remember. It's not about the individuals. It's about what you bring to the sisterhood, the concept. And Valia, since she's the top dog, she thinks she's above that, so she can fuck over anyone because, well, she's the sisterhood.
Yes.
And even her own sister, like her actual sister, she'll fuck her over because, well, I need to know what the prophecy is because that's more important than how you feel about this one acolyte.
Yeah.
So get over it and get her to do the thing. And then you have Lila. Throughout this episode, she's going to people asking them, like, do you think I should do this? And it's so weird to, okay, is this okay, you and I have had media go through this, but you have also, like, in your own spare time, watched documentaries, watched YouTube videos about cult stuff.
Yeah.
Is it weird that she goes up to her fellow cult members and most of them kind of go, yeah, this is kind of like over the line and weird? There's not very much of, like, to my mind, there's not as much of the classic, like, yeah, drink the Kool-Aid, Lila, that sounds great, as I would expect. There's a lot more reticence.
No, especially within their group. They're not as indoctrinated when they're talking to each other, which, it feels like they should.
You understand Sister Jen? Why she isn't. We heard her alleged background last episode, and the way the actress performs her, she's the maverick. She's the wild card. She's the one they have to break in, is the phrase,
But the rest of them all seem fairly comfortable with their place within their sisterhood, but are willing to question it, which it feels like they should have eradicated that before they got to this point of the training.
Right? They're if they were like children, I could understand.
Hesitant to voice these concerns, Like they're in this library space with a bunch of other people that could overhear, could report back. There's, that position above.
Yeah.
But you asked me a question a little while ago, which is like, kind of, why isn't this working? And I would like to propose, because it doesn't fully work, because it, as a show, really feels like these scenes are happening and that's all that's happening in this world. And then we jump to the next one. It doesn't feel real and expansive. So, because you're only seeing when the pieces get moved and there's no sense of other things really happening and these people having existed before,
lack
and
of history with the
existing
characters
after. So there's not any weight of reality. It's just them moving the way that they need to for the sake of plot. So we don't get the sense of the journey that these women have been on, except maybe Jan.
Yeah.
But we're led to question the authenticity
of her accounts of her life. Yeah. And I was going to go through a bunch of stuff, and I realized these things were just amplifying your point. I started bringing up questions because we know the story. We know the end point. We know what they have, like the beats of it so clearly. So clearly. Lila is going to and ah, and Sister Tula is going to and ah, but in the end, it'll be committed and it'll be a tragic thing, and they'll get parts of the prophecy a bit more to tease out for future episodes to really unravel and deal with. And we're going to have...
And it's going to be not the actual person that they wanted to talk to, but the one that they murdered.
Yes, the one that was murdered by... Only Valia knows.
They bring that up.
Only Valia, pretty much only Valia knows that was the case. Like, that was just... And now it's brought up in a way that people understand. Oh, isn't that spooky? Spooky, spooky, spooky. We all know... We knew that's the way it was going to go. So, when we were padding out the scenes with all of this stuff, and it wasn't living up to what I needed, I was just bringing up all these questions like, shouldn't these other sisters be more indoctrinated? Like, yeah, it's fine to have one of them, like Sister Jen, for instance, be the one that's like, are you sure you want to do this? The sister's going to use you. But then when she talks to other ones and they're like, oh, I don't know, like, it feels disingenuous. And it's that lack of history you're saying. I don't feel the history. And then I was bringing this up in my mind, and it's irrelevant because all it is bringing is what you're saying and what I'm saying. I was going to say, maybe if they were like teenagers, this would even hit harder and work better because they're more naive, but that, who cares? Like, what made Paul Atreides, a part of what made him complicated was he was a teenage boy and he was being manipulated by all these forces outside of his understanding.
But
that made it interesting. And I thought you could do the same here, but at the end of the day, even if they were teen girls, they're still not very interesting.
Yeah, but Lila's death, she doesn't need to be young for that to be tragic.
No.
It would be a shortcut.
Well, that's what I mean. It's a shortcut, but
they've already killed one child.
They've already killed one child. But, like, there is a narrative convenience to having them be younger. Like, oh, you understand. Yeah, it actually would be sad. Like, on a baseline level of Writing 101, like I mentioned with Paul Atreides, there's a point of, like, oh, he was a teenage boy, and all of these things are out of his control, and then he gains control, and what does he do with it, and he's drunk with power, and so on, and so on, and so on. There's something to it. In this... there could be something there, but even then, they're not very interesting people. You know what I hate? You know what I hate about this series? It's not just the music. It's this obsession that not only it has, but most of modern science fiction TV, which is these empty vagaries, these platitudes, these chin-stroking, fake deep lines of dialogue. Star Trek Discovery does it. Foundation does it. This does it. Like, I just am so tired of these sci-fi shows where, like, there's so many lines that they say here that you could swap out with a line from Star Trek Discovery and there would be no difference. And it doesn't have the vernacular and the language of the books where they get into a lot of these philosophical musings. It's a pet peeve of mine, but the sisterhood side of the story is filled with that, where you get these actresses very breathily and whispering these nothing burger lines that sound important because the music's swelling and the cinematography is also moody and the lighting is so stark and the actors are saying it with like this hushed tone that it sounds meaningful, but what does it actually mean? What does it actually say about anything? Like it's like, oh, okay, great. You
substance
said,
is not to be found.
Substance is not to be found here, and yeah. Lila dies. We've said we knew the outcome of this, but what do you actually get out of this and feel about this?
I was annoyed during that scene because I could see how much money they threw at that moment. And I was annoyed.
Why does that annoy you?
Because it just didn't feel like it was in service of anything in particular other than showboating. Like, she explains that this does this on a cellular level, and then we get CG cells where we see that happening, and it's like, you just told us.
But now we have to visually see it.
I don't care.
Show and tell is the rule here. You're right, though.
It's redundant.
It's showboating.
So much of that scene has things repeated so that it is redundant. And it makes it dull. And it undercuts the emotional impact of her death.
The style over substance is right there in the genetic memory stuff. The agony. I thought it was embarrassing. I didn't think it looked very good. We say money was thrown here. I thought it looked terrible. I thought it looked absolutely awful. I thought it was goofy.
They really,
so goofy.
They just use so much CG so that it doesn't have any weight to it. Like, the entire environment that she's in looks like it's digital effects.
Oh yeah, and they've got these CG mummy faces, and I thought it was so lame. Every Dune adaptation, every one of them, even the Denis Villeneuve ones that are oh so serious, have some interpretation of something from the book that I don't know why they did it like that. Like the David Lynch one, at this point I get it, because it's David Lynch and he's an eccentric weird guy and a lot of his decisions have like their own crazy internal logic where it's like, even if I don't understand why there's pugs there, and I actually do know why there are pugs in that movie, but like, it's kind of like insane in a way that kind of makes sense internally. And the Denis Villeneuve one is so po-faced and straight-laced that when it has one or two things, like as a book reader, I'm like, that's a weird way of interpreting that. I wouldn't have... Okay, all the Harkonnens are bold in this interpretation. I don't know why. I guess, I mean, there's no reason not to, but weird choice. And this is a weird choice. The genetic memory and the agony stuff is a huge thing. And the way that it's represented here is, I think it's just stupid. There's no better way to describe it. It's not how I envisioned it. But not only is it that how I envisioned it, they just have a lot of garish stuff in there. Like the camera moves, they have like that effect where like the actress is still, but all this crazy stuff is swooshing by her, but she looks like she's moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The blur effect, the zooms, and the CGI mummy creature faces. I couldn't take the emotional parts of it seriously, and the actual core information we got out of it, I didn't absorb because I was just looking at this. I wasn't in it. Could you tell me what they learned? Other than the one that was murdered in the first episode took hold and said, fuck you. But what was the actual stuff that the first Mother Superior expanded upon in the prophecy? Do you remember?
No, wait, I thought it was all the one that got murdered and she was feeding them fake information.
Okay, great. What did she feed them? What did she even say? Like, what was it? I don't know.
I can't remember.
All I remember is the presentation of the scene, not the actual substance of the scene.
I remember Tula repeating a lot of things that she'd said, like that Lila said.
Yeah, that's all.
But even though
what was
things
she
were
repeating?
said twice, don't remember.
It's a classic case of the
I know
way you
I'm going to be
present it.
told again.
Don't worry, people drop us some comments about it. I feel very conflicted because I think we've had nothing but bad things to say about this episode. But I didn't feel as negatively about it when I watched it. I was mildly I was mildly entertained. But
I was bored.
Yeah, you can talk about your feelings on it when you give your rating. This is my expounding upon why, like, I'm having a tougher time with my rating because I liked some of the Imperium stuff. I liked the Desmond Hart stuff. I liked the moral quandaries brought about. I liked seeing Mother Superior be trapped in a corner and having to be stuck there for this episode. She's now going to get fucked over by this guy she cannot predict, cannot control, doesn't know anything about. That's exciting to me. And it wasn't just, though the potential of what this could be is exciting to me, the actual stuff that we got in the episode in regards to that was, I did get enjoyment out of, I actually did get entertainment, enjoyment, and thought out of it. And I thought a lot of the performances and writing there were pretty strong, but there was weaknesses there too. Too much stuff was cranked up. But then this show used to be called Dune Sisterhood, and they pivoted away from that to the prophecy. And I think a part of it is, well, if we don't call it sisterhood, it makes it feel less like the sisterhood is the primary focus. And that's telling, because what is the primary focus?
The sisterhood and the Imperium.
But it's called prophecy, so is it the prophecy? They're also worried about this prophecy.
It's about the prophecy and the way that intersects with their plans, their genetic plans for the Emperor.
The use of prophecy in Frank Herbert's work was more deliberate. It had a point. And a lot of it was about falsehoods. A lot of it was about how it isn't real or the way that we build narratives from it. In this, it feels like, oh, there's an actual genuine prophecy and they're just trying to get the pieces of it to understand it better, which is a way of telling it, but it's a more traditional way of telling prophecy stories. And it doesn't really say anything about prophecy itself and what we do with it. I can see in the future of this series them going that direction more, but considering this is a Dune property, it's so dissatisfying to me when it comes to just the prophetic stuff, because in the Frank Herbert books, you can have a really long discussion with a fan of those books about if prophecy is real or not. But it's not even about that. It's about what we do with prophecy and how we wield it to our benefit and how we manipulate others with it. And this series just doesn't really engage with that, and that's the name of the show. So what's the focus? Is it the Sisterhood? Is it the Imperium? Is it Desmond Hart? I don't know. I give this a yum.
Sorry, I am also going to be predictable and give this episode of Dune Prophecy a yum. I was bored. I was noticing production things. I thought that it was very obvious in what it was doing and what it was setting up for future things and where it was ending things as well, I was getting really frustrated with the characters because they were just doing the obvious thing every single time. Like the fact that the prince opens his mouth. Like he just happened to see Desmond Hart get arrested by the Atreides swordmaster.
Guy, yeah, he just happens to see that.
He just happened to see it. He just happened, like he's dumb enough to just blab about it,
and it doesn't
to her anyway. Like,
and it doesn't even have a satisfying payoff because the way that the Duke goes about it could have just been done anyway within the story, because he has suspicions about the Emperor's trusting the Emperor, because the Emperor's so nakedly untrustworthy.
Could have been interesting?
What?
He uses one of the thinking machines.
Oh, that would have been fun, because he doesn't care
He's
about
not afraid of them.
Butler and Jihad. Yeah, he doesn't give a shit about that. And that's Rachel, see what we're doing? I was talking about them being teenage girls. You're talking about this. We're rewriting stuff because we want there to be some more use of the tools and the characters and the themes.
There is something that could be good here, and it's not quite here yet. And we aren't beaten down by its lack of following through on its potential. And we have a history of being interested in shows that have good ideas.
Of course. Did you know that there is a controversy about this series? There's many, but one of them that I did not realize was a controversy was they are not using the word jihad. The thinking machine war is very well known as the Butlerian Jihad. And jihad is used oftentimes, and I don't think it was used or even referenced as a jihad it's been a little while in the Denis Villeneuve movies. I can't remember if it was ever used there, but there is a controversy about that because there's the claim that the writers are being so culturally sensitive about using the word itself.
Why does it matter?
It does matter because that's what it's called, and in the Dune world and universe, as we see, there's a lot of use of that language and culture. It's very pivotal to the stuff, all of that is there.
I hadn't noticed its absence.
Nor did I, and I honestly chalked it up to a part of its prequelness. They're just over 100 years after that, and they're still calling it a war. And I thought maybe the language of things would have changed in the next 10,000 years, by the way. That was my reasoning. I haven't read if the writers have said they're not going to use it because of politically correct reasons. But if they are doing it because of politically correct reasons, I understand the anger. I understand the anger of it because in these books, in this whole property, that is a huge part of it, using the vernacular and words and language like that. And so to remove it is removing a part of the characterization of the entire thing. So it is sanitizing it in that way. And the point is, these stories are not clean stories. There's rough parts of these stories, intentionally or not. And there are things that you obviously wouldn't include in an adaptation, like Frank Herbert's homophobia. You wouldn't include that in these, but there are other things where it's the jihad stuff, I didn't realize there was a controversy. The biggest controversy for me was there was no worms in this episode. No actual worm on screen, Rachel. How do you feel about that?
We can't get all worms all the time.
Rachel, I thought you were going to say we can't get all wormed up about this. I honestly thought you were going to say that, and I was going to roll my eyes at you, but you went a different direction. But
Sorry?
Sorry indeed. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed our material here, you can support us on Patreon and get these discussions earlier, as well as a huge back catalogue of bonus content. We are also going through The Expanse for the first time ever, and we are releasing our episodes on the main feed, and we have all of them over on our Patreon, so feel free to support the podcast if you have the means to do so. You can also email us and contact us and let us know your thoughts on the things we have said here or on Dune Prophecy. What's our email address, Rachel?
yumyumpod@gmail.com.
We are on all of those social medias under yumyumpod or yumyumpodcast, as well as all of the podcasting sites. So make sure to follow us, subscribe, and give us a rating and review. It would be much appreciated, but we have got to get out of here because if we keep talking about Dune Prophecy, the casting agents will put us in the show because there's a lot of Australians in this show. A surprising amount. Rachel, we should be giving this series a yum because a weird byproduct of our podcast has been demanding for Australians to be in these outer space sci-fi shows. And
we're here.
I didn't expect it to be Dune Prophecy. I honestly didn't. It's not like it's filmed here. I don't think it's filmed, but they've got like 9 actors from Australia in this show. And I don't know why, but I'm really glad to hear the Duke in his Australian accent say Arrakis. He says it more in the way that Arrakis turns into in the later Frank Herbert books. Did you know this, Rachel? In the later books, Arrakis, because language changes, is just called Rakis. So Brendan Cowell, because of his Aussie accent and the snooty voice he puts on, when he says Arrakis, he really leans into the Rakis part of it, which brings a smile to my face, because I'm sure Frank wanted that.
And have we discussed the untapped value of whale seed? Seed.